Let me know if I'm not loud enough on this thing, if the levels are not loud enough. Whatever works. I can't hear it from here really well. We're gonna. We talked yesterday about the. Let's see. Let me back up to see where we were. The last. Yeah.
Does that sound better, Michael?
Yeah, seems to be fine. Okay. We ended last night with this statement that the scholars are saying, and that goes for Einstein, that goes for, Carl Sagan. Obviously, we had a quote from him yesterday. But there's even the father of rocket science, all the way back to Edmund Halley. It's been a very common understanding that the planet may have been visited, by beings from other planets. It's completely understandable that could happen. And Jack Barringer's quote that there's been 300,000 documents, 300,000 texts still surviving that, talk about that, of the ones that still remain. And here from the book of Isaiah, we have these very enigmatic tracts. You'd think that the compilers of the Bible would have done a better editing job, since their job was to try and cover up information. And yet these kinds of incredible statements are there, which, what do they mean? Coming from the end of heaven to destroy the whole land. I mean, these things need to be interpreted. And in the Revelations, of course, which is a fascinating document, it says, and the great dragon was cast down, that old serpent. All these terminologies that we're getting, are they just the ramblings of some insane eccentric? They certainly don't sound like theological language, really. They don't sound like religious language. And people have often not paused to stop and think, what do these terms actually refer to? They don't give you footnotes, in the Bible necessarily. They don't explain things. They'll explain, the most bizarre things. They'll give you great details about this fig tree that was growing in the middle of Lebanon, or the details of this well. Insignificant details are endlessly, elaborated, and yet monumentally important things like, who's the dragon? Blank. So, we pick up today and from here. The deluge was not a natural phenomena, I write in the book, but was caused inadvertently by alien beings from distant reaches who entered into our solar system between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago. So 2 things from this. One is that's a pretty wild statement, because again, even if you do, say you were a scientist, say you were a geologist, an anthropologist, a paleologist, okay, what happens even in that field if you finally, after 20 years of study and head scratching, do accept, in fact, that the world has been visited by, say, a deluge? I mean, that's how unbelievably slow these people are. It takes them this amount of time to even get round the idea that maybe we did have a pole shift or something. Well, then imagine selling them the fact that, oh yeah, we did, but it was also caused by, right, human, or let's say humanoid interaction. They're going to go, come on, we spent 200 years here just trying to get warmed up to the idea that the planet may have even had that. And now you're telling us it was man-made? Do us a favor. So that's the thing that needs to be proven. You can't just say things like that without proving it. And the other thing is, if you're familiar with Zecharia Sitchin's work, you're going to notice a difference in the dates. Zecharia Sitchin pushes the visitation, back 400,000 years. He's very specific about that. And I tend to not agree with that. And the quick reason is because that date is not corroborated by any other miscellaneous legend from anywhere in the world. Zechariah focuses almost entirely on the Babylonian Sumerian record, and maybe only very briefly goes into everything else, and practically neglects the Celtic and many others. I don't do that. What I try to do is take something I've read and then see how many other people are corroborating and cross-referencing it. So even those dates may not be right, the ones I've written, but they seem to be more in line with what the geologists are now discovering about the Earth, and they certainly are more in line with what the other tribes are saying. Meaning that the 400,000 year date is artificially pushed back far, far too far. And I tend to think that there's something not accurate about that. These visitors were extremely scientifically advanced humanoid beings who entered into our solar system after being forced to exit their own planet, or planets. They had been expunged by opposition forces and were being pursued across the galaxy. Upon arrival, they set up an unmanned makeshift decoy center on the planet Tiamat, which once existed between Mars and Jupiter, but they actually took refuge on Earth. Tiamat was a vast ocean planet known from antiquity as the second sun. The second sun motif is replete in ancient mythology. It's not just coming from remote viewers and other channelers who've been receiving a lot of this information, but it's also in the records itself. Actually, it wasn't a sun. It was a vast planet. But because of its atmosphere, right, the actual sun's rays on Tiamat made it appear very resplendent. Tiamat was called by various names. Tiamat is a Swedish name, and it means the goddess of the waters, or the bitter waters. And it was also called Lucifer, by the way. That's where the word originally comes from. The son of the morning meant the sun, or Tiamat, the second sun. Phaeton, remember Phaeton, the hero in Greek myth who goes too close to the sun and falls down? That originally was not a story about the actual sun. It was again a mythology about Phaeton, about Tiamat. Because you can imagine if for hundreds and thousands of years we've had a second sun up there, and it's not there now, but if we've had it, you would imagine that just like all the other planets, there's mythologies associated with it, and there are. But if that thing disappears and mankind forgets about it, then you can't account for all those mythologies suddenly. So what do? You shift the whole category over to the sun itself, or one of the other planets that is there. Mistake. And then, we've got to come along and go, wait a minute, that doesn't fit, put it back. It's an endless process of trying to extrapolate the mythologies then. But it was also called Marduk, Vulcan, Rahab, Typhon, Tistria, and Kingu. Don't worry about if you don't get all these notes because it's all in the book. And the Revelation says, yes, there did fell a great star from heaven. They say star, planet, same thing. Chuck Meisler, he says, these asteroids are not ordinary pieces of rocks and clouds. Oh, by the way, when it was destroyed, you see, it's not there. The asteroid belt is its remains. And Chuck Meisler is saying, these asteroids are not ordinary pieces of rocks and clouds of dust that never quite coalesced to become a legitimate planet, which is the story that we get from the Orthodox. Another estimate is that the original planet may have been 15 times larger than the Earth, and that's exactly what they say. It was a very, very large planet. The rings of Saturn may have come into being because of these cosmic upheavals. Moreover, the added debris from Tiamat increased the weight of the Earth and slowed the rotation of the Earth, adding 5¼ days to the year. Allen and Delaire, in a fantastic book called Cataclysm, they say, if we elevate the moon, right, to planetary status, as the Sumerians appear to have done, then we have a total of 10 planets orbiting the sun today. On this basis, one planet is still missing from the earlier Sumerian total. Could there really have been another planet known to the Sumerians, as yet unknown to us and lost since their day? The fact that it was resplendent, it wasn't an actual sun, as I said, it was a planet. That is not as far-fetched as it sounds, because in fact Venus, the morning star that's still there, is the second planet from the sun, and it is the third brightest object in the sky, so much so that it casts a distinct shadow on a moonless night. So the rays off the actual sun, whether it was because of the water on Tiamat or the actual atmosphere itself, it appeared to our forefathers as a sun, a bright sun. And if you actually get out the Star Wars movie, I think it's the original one which opens the series, and Luke Skywalker is, coming back to his home, and he finds that his uncle and aunt have been murdered. And there's that big dramatic scene, where he walks up onto the sand dunes and looks to the horizon, sort of in tears, and wants to know, what is his destiny? In the background in the sky, you'll see two planetoids. And the fact that the word Luke Skywalker comes from Lucius Skywalker, is the sun that walks the sky, right? There's a lot of stuff going on there symbolically. So this has been encoded into a lot of science fiction and movies, but we overlook it because we think it's just poetic license. The Enuma Elish, which I believe is a Babylonian ancient book, a very important book that was discovered, says, go and cut off Tiamat's life and let the winds convey her blood to the secret places. Talking about the destruction of a planetary body. The cosmic upheavals were stylized in myths as the conflicts between Rama and Ravana, Horus and Set, Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, Arthur and Mordred, St. George and the Dragon. These incredible cataclysms were not just between knights and personalities on the earth. They were actually personifications of cosmic upheavals, as Immanuel Velikovsky and others have pointed out. In the book of Enoch, and behold, a star fell from heaven, and the children of the earth began to tremble and quake before them and to flee from them. And again I saw how they began to gore each other and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. Alan Delaire, they say that giant electromagnetic storms, lightnings, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, stupendous hurricanes, abruptly displaced bodies of water, celestial bombardment, rains of astonishing volume, and a mighty flood are all quick-acting, violent events. So they're not big believers in this slow, gradual, uniformitarian concept. They're talking about instantaneous tragedies, cataclysms on the earth. The book of Enoch goes on to say, and in those days Noah saw the earth, that it had sunk down, and its destruction was nigh. Right? That the earth was about to be destroyed. And he rose from thence and went to the end of the earth and cried aloud to his grandfather Enoch. And Noah said bitterly 3 times, hear me, hear me, hear me. And I, Enoch, said unto him, tell me what it is that is falling upon the earth, that it is in such evil plight and shaken. The Scandinavians have their Midgard serpent that we looked at yesterday. But the Midgard serpent, again, is a personification of cataclysmic celestial events. And in their books, they say that the Midgard serpent blew so much poison that the whole sky and sea are splattered with it. So something's going on. Alan and Delaire say that traditionally, the destruction was almost always associated with water in one form or another. Because Tiamat was mostly a water planet. And they talk about the watery nature of the planet. In Revelation, and the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as if it were a lamp. And in the name of the star was called wormwood, and many men died of the water because it was made bitter. On this planet, before the destruction of Tiamat, the only ocean or the only water that was on this planet was in one place. And that was between the Caspian and Black Sea. In fact, the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea were once joined together in a mighty ocean called the Miocene Ocean. Right? And that was it, ladies and gentlemen. There was no other water on this planet before 50,000 years ago. All those oceans you see are all new, relatively speaking. That is also the reason why people fear the sea, right, genetically, because you'd wonder why anyone has any of those phobias in the first place. And the fact is that the Miocene Ocean spilled out, leaving the Black and the Caspian Sea, and the rest of the waters became the Mediterranean. This is what the mythologies are talking about. And it's been proven. The science is in now, by the way. I can give you all the references to this. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heavens were covered. 15 cubits upward did the water prevail, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth. All the fountains of the great deep broke open, and the windows of heaven were opened. So, I mean, how clear the language is, even in the Bible. Appalling destruction. Hang on a minute. Can we pause that for a second? And we said yesterday we want to look a little bit at this whole thing about the mass extinctions, whether they existed or not. Well, in Alan and Delaire's book, When the Earth Nearly Died, they're saying that in Europe, immense herds of diverse animals utterly vanished off the face of the earth for no obvious biological reason. Paul S. Martin, an expert on the mammoths, he said, animals that have been native for millions of years disappeared under circumstances that were suspiciously sudden. The loss of over 30 genera of large mammals were wiped out in North America alone. Look at that. Talking about the lost planet, Tiamat, well, look at the etymology. I love etymology and the study of words because it reveals a lot of things. You can cover up a lot of things, but it's very hard to change the meaning of words down through time. The word sun, or in Latin sol, right? What does the word sol actually mean? It means, does it not, solo, solitary, the solitary one. Sol, right, means that, like soliloquy. And in fact, the word luna also comes from the word meaning alone. That's where the words derive themselves from. Because after the destruction of Tiamat, the ancients used to refer to the sun, or whatever they used to call it before, as the solitary one, and the moon as she's alone, the luna. They're the alone one. Look at the connotation. Of course they're alone. Their twin has been destroyed. Etymology, again, the very words we still to this day use for any kind of tragedy are actually relevant to what I'm talking about. The word disaster actually means dis, which means to be without, and aster is star, no star, or destruction of a star. Catastrophe also means the same thing. Kata, to break down, and strophe meant the stars, the destruction of a star. It's so fresh in our genetic memory that we're using these today. Do you remember, anyone here ever heard of Charles Fort, the great Charles Fort? Right. This is a man who went around literally doing this because he had been hearing, you see, about all of these fish that are falling from the sky, you know, and huge blocks of ice and oil and whatever else, and even live fish and frogs and what have you. That's what that is. After the destruction of Tiamat, the debris gets, you know, super frozen in the cold reaches of space. But as that debris of the asteroid belt will approach our Roche field, some of the debris will still fall down from the sky and defrost, you know? Because the sky out there, the night sky is like a cryogenic chamber. It instantly super freezes whatever is there. But then coming back into the heat of our atmosphere, even live fish will still fall. It's one of the most extraordinary phenomena. And all sorts of, you know, excuses are given by the ordinary scientists to try and discount that.
I missed how they go up. How do they get in the air in the first place?
They come from outer space. They come from the destruction of Tiamat, from the remnants that is out there in the asteroid belt. Now the Holocene period, which was prior to this, they say the womb of the earth did not, afterwards, the womb of the earth, after the tragedy, did not bear vegetation, did not sprout. The broad plain was choked with salt. For 1 year they ate couched grass, and the third year came, their features were altered by hunger. Right? After the tragedy, the people of the earth were in terrible state, says the Babylonian books. Poison and venom of the noxious creatures were all mixed up with the water, and the waters became as salt. Remember wormwood, the bitter waters? Right. And they talk about the fact that in the Vera Perpetuum, the perpetual spring, various remarkable and often quite unbelievable characteristics were attributed to it in the period before this tragedy on our earth. The human inhabitants are in the prime of life with no aging or senility. This is, scientists are looking into this now about the fact that, is it true that in the ancient times people had longer lives, you see, and lots of health? The Roman writer Ovid stated that during the reign of the legendary king Cronus, springtime was perennial. Virtually every commentator of antiquity on this topic agreed that this lost age was a golden one and that the earth was a veritable paradise. And they talk about the axis being straight, which is called tholiiform. And in that time you would have a perpetual spring in the northern climes. No ice, quite different. And a different kind of electromagnetism, a different kind of ultraviolet rays, a different Schumann waves and the Hartmann waves would all be different, affecting your biology, affecting your aging process. As I said, the individuals that came here set up a dummy base on Tiamat because they were being pursued, but they came to the earth to hide. Their pursuers, imagining that they were on Tiamat, utterly incinerated and destroyed the planet. That tells you one thing. It tells you that they must really have wanted to see the people they were pursuing to be dead in order to destroy a whole planet. Whether they had scanned our planet, they even realized there was people living here or whatever. Whatever catastrophe took place, the sum total result of it was that the planet Tiamat was completely destroyed and changed the whole of the solar system's harmonics and it caused an untold devastation on this planet. But see, the deluge and the destruction of our planet happened, but our planet still survived. Now these beings that had visited us here, they actually had taken refuge on this planet, which was mostly a forest planet. But under the forest level of the trees, then you have the underground caverns that von Daniken and others have gone running around the world proving exist. Well, they had gone into these caverns, and they even had vessels that could go under the water. Now the hollow earth is a concept. And of course, it came to a lot more fame when Admiral Byrd of the United States Air Force literally, flew over it in a plane. He was an admiral, but he had a project to take ships down to the Antarctic. And in circumnavigating these areas, he claims to have seen literally in his memoirs that came out after his death that absolutely he had seen the entrances to the hollow earth. One of the famous writers from the 19th century, Bulwer Lytton, he said, in his book, The Coming Race, describes the existence of a utopian society of advanced beings who live in tunnels and caverns beneath the surface of the earth in the land they call the Virilya. These beings, known as the Ana, were forced into the inner earth because of the earth changes, specifically a flood which destroyed their civilization thousands of years before the biblical cataclysm.
Is it the same as the Anunnaki?
Could be, because look at yes, exactly, the phraseology is very similar. In the Bible, Samuel, and the king said to her, "Be not afraid, for what sawest thou?" And the woman said unto Saul, "I saw gods ascending out of the earth." It's all there. In the one decent footnote I've actually found, it's unbelievable that that was even put in. Look at this. In one of the Bibles, it says, "Dead things are formed from under the water, and the inhabitants thereof." In Job, so I looked to the footnote in the comment in this older Bible which actually had them, and it said, "The place where the Rephaim stay, which is beneath the waters." Dead things in Hebrew is Rephaim, the offspring of the fallen angels akin to the Nephilim. I didn't write it. They did. And a lot of information in the Bible about the hollow earth concept. "Though they dig into hell, thence shall mine hand take them. Though they climb up into heaven, thence I will bring them down." How can you dig into hell? "Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea." Inhabitants in the sea? "Wherefore God also hath highly exalted him, and given him a name which is above every name, that of the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow, of things in heaven, things in earth, and things under the earth." And now that we're talking about hollow earth, it might explain one of the most enigmatic of all of the statements, and it's in the Ten Commandments. "You shalt not make for yourself a graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, or that is under the water of the earth." Yeah, no wonder they wouldn't want you to make images of it, because look who's talking. Why would it be forbidden? Now we can sort of make a bit of sense of this. Of course you wouldn't want to actually sit down and draw. They wouldn't allow you to paint or draw or make sculptures of the beings that they're talking about here, if you take it that religion is caused from these beings. Ever heard that term, you know, the old term, the devil in the deep blue sea? Where does that come from? And then the idea of the giantism. In Deuteronomy, "A people great and tall, the children of the Anakims, whom thou knowest, and whom thou hast heard say, who can stand before the children of Anak?" Well, recently, in the 19th century, when antiquarians went out, they found this. You know, men almost twice as tall as the average Englishman. Huge. Not even like their own types. In July 1877, 4 prospectors moving along the hills of Spring Valley near Eureka, Nevada, using their picks, the prospectors soon chipped out human legs and foot bones that had been encased in solid quartzite from knee to heel. That should be heel, H-E-E-L. The bone was 39 inches long. Right? Then, a human skeleton 17 feet tall was discovered in Gagañan in the Philippines. In Mesa Verde, corpses were discovered 9 feet in height, possessing hands of 6 digits. So who the hell are these people then? And even today, you know, we have this concept of the freaks, you know, and the Siamese kids and other deformities and things like that, and kids with fur on them and all of this weirdness. And of course, that's all shunted to the backwards of lunatic asylums, isn't it? Because they're not going to tell even the parents who give birth to these children what's really going on. They go, "Oh, well, you know, it's just you had a freak, it's a genetic malformation, too bad, lock it up." But we're not being told the true story. Name and address, lots of names. A lot of them are in the book there. I think that the Anunnaki is famous. And the Jedi, as I said, the Nagas in India. And the one that William Bramley, who wrote The Gods of Eden, which is a very fine book, he's referring to them as the Brotherhood of the Snake, or the Serpent people. And in Ireland, they talk about them as being the Fomorians and so on. The Serpent people. And we've been seeing yesterday, what we did yesterday was we showed a lot of serpentine imagery. In the Bible, they call them the Nephilim. The Hebrews know them as Nephilim. This is a Hebrew word, translates as giants, from the root Nephal, meaning fallen ones. Most modern versions of the Bible have left this word untranslated. when the Greek Septuagint was made, Nephilim was translated as Gegenes, meaning the earthborn, right? So now suddenly angels are earthborn. Look at that twist. The word may also come from Nephel, which means bad or strange birth. We'll be talking about genetics later. Strange birth, or from Kenephilim, which means the serpents. The serpents of wisdom. And we talked yesterday about all of the serpentine symbolism. That all over the world, you keep seeing the symbol of the dragon and the serpent. And even clearly showing in these Grecian pictures that there's a hybridization thing here. But again, we just overlook this normally. Here's the god Thoth, you see? And here's Pythonus, the gods of wisdom, holding the earth and sharing wisdom. Here's the ape god. Could that not be the apes, or us, in veneration to the serpent gods for the knowledge that they're giving us? So all over the world. And here also the combat, the hero, right? Even in Middle Ages, even in Anglo-Saxon world, the hero, in order to prove he is a hero, has got to go knock on the door of some dragon and try and kill it in order to have that on his shield and then say, hey, I made it, I'm the king. To prove his merit. There's always some woman around that he's got to prove it to. So, it's an old story, you know what I mean? Yeah, here's Zeus with his thunderbolt, the Vajra, or I guess they call it the thunderbolt, fighting what? A half man, half demon, half serpent. I mean, what's going on here? And do you notice that the demon in that one has the wings, implying that they came from out there? They have air, they can fly through the air. Again, the great struggle. Obviously, this can represent man in his internal struggle with the demonic side of his nature. But that's not exactly what they're showing, is it? I mean, you don't have to be a PhD in art history and aesthetics to realize they're actually showing a physical concept here, as well as an inner existential fight. You look at this picture here with the god, the human is fighting a man whose legs are like the legs of a serpent. See that? And the weird theriomorphic beings all over the world. And wherever you have the theriomorphic beings, you have the image of the twin serpents, or the serpent of energy.
What do you mean theriomorphic?
Theriomorphic means part animal, part human. Animal-headed. Lots of snakes, lots of serpents, representing the power of the shaman, the power of transformation. And the weird antennae concepts. As we said yesterday, the very word for angel, seraphim and cherubim, come from the words meaning fiery serpents. Now, of course, what did they do? At some point towards the time when Christianity became more orthodox, they took the concept of angel and sweetened it up to make it look like a man. But originally angels were bird-headed, or they had theriomorphic shapes. It's in the book. I talk that comes from the idea that they either had flight or they had some power of genetically transmuting themselves. We talked about that yesterday. Pythagoras literally means I am the python. That the Pendragon, Arthur Pendragon, means the head of the dragon. In Scotland, they have the Dragoons. The band is a detachment of the British Army. The Dragoons. The dragons. And then they had this thing called the Dragon Court. I think it was the Plantagenets in the 14th century had a court they called the Dragon Court. So the visitors emerged after the cataclysm from the Hollow Earth and took up residency on the continent of Appalachia, where they founded their great city and empire of Atlantis. Initially, they set to work adjusting to the new planet and made elaborate astronomical calibrations in order to establish where exactly they were, and to aid them when they eventually made to vacate the Earth in their crafts. That was their idea. You come here, you hide, you hope you're not discovered, and then you get out of here. Obviously, the scientists are saying our planet has been visited many times. And they come, they do their work, and they don't want to be seen. One can even argue that even the visitations that are seen now, very clearly those aliens, whoever they are, don't want to be seen and are not happy when they're spotted, right, because of their behavior afterwards. When some witness sees them, they kind of just go away, or they try to get away. They don't want to be seen. They don't want to interfere. And we would probably be doing the same thing. If we had that capacity, you'd go, you'd do your research, and then you'd leave. It's like sort of that Gene Roddenberry, prime directive thing. You don't get into the destiny of other people, other cultures.
The visitors are the ones that was the cataclysm caused by the
Yeah.
TMO.
Not-
Consciously done to get rid of the people.
It was consciously done to try and get rid of them. The visitors who were coming were pretending to hide on Tiamat in order to, elude their their pursuers. Now, obviously, we don't know if the pursuers who were pursuing them, whether it was from Sirius or Orion, I actually think it was Alpha Draconis, but that's just, because of the dragon symbol. And also because the pyramid's, chamber opens up on and faces Alpha Draconis in those days. That's where I think they came from. But we can't really know whether their pursuers were any more moral or good than the guys they were pursuing. We got to use this language like good and evil, but how the hell do we know, right? We don't even know if the pursuers were evil as the ones who were pursuing, right? We don't know that. We have to assume that.
None of them seem very wise.
None of them seem very wise, exactly. And in fact, I've found out evidence after that totally proves what you're saying, that they don't seem very wise. And we're sort of lumbered with this now, this problem of this visitation. But what would you do if you were highly intelligent and you'd come to this planet, which was a different size, you look up to the stars and everything's different, and it's not only different, it's really different now because you've just had one of the planets in this solar system being completely destroyed, and the planets have all changed. They say that, Uranus that spins like that instead of like that is caused by something hitting it or something, getting it off its axis. So what you will do is you will have your astronomer types, your great scientist type, immediately setting to work to build what? The great astrological calendars, right? Because they can be put so that you can make observations on a daily basis to find out where you are in this wing of the galaxy. And that is the origin of the reason why the great monuments were built. It is not for ceremony and ritual like has been told to you. That may have been subsequently later on as other people came along, right? Say slightly less intelligent or aware, might have gone to these places for ritual purposes. But the reason why these were built and the reason why they align with the celestial movements is for very practical reasons. You'd do the same thing. Imagine yourself if you were lost on a strange planet. You'd have to deal with the problem of astronavigation, wouldn't you? So you commandeer the help of whoever was around at that time, the Neanderthal people, and you have your ships all are able to work, these spaceships. So, oh my God, we can't work out how they could move the stones. Well, if you've got spaceships that can fly across the galaxy and probably through black holes into the other side of the universe, it's very easy on a planet like this to move a couple of bricks from one side to the other, isn't it? And then you put them up quickly, right? The head person would have these guys align it so they could sit there and make calibrations of exactly where the alignments are. That's what it was done for. And that is why the word Nephilim also happens to mean, when it's translated, it means watcher. And I think that Nephilim means the watchers because it referred to the fact that they were watching the sky. They were astronomers who were watching the heavens. The gigantic men, the Adites, are remembered by the Arabians as a great and civilized race, right? Lenormand and Chevalier say they were depicted as men of gigantic stature. Their strength was equal to their size, and they easily moved great blocks of stone. So whether he's talking about the visitors themselves or individuals that they had created or commandeered, we don't know, but we do know that such people existed. On the continent of Atlantis, then, it says here that many beings have visited this planet for various reasons best known to themselves. The policy of most extraterrestrial visitors is total non-intervention for either better or worse. The Nephilim, however, did not obey this edict. They emerged from the underworld and began making contact with the Earth's indigenous inhabitants. Okay, this is the central and most important thing here, is that they did not just leave. And people have speculated as to why they would have done that. And I just go to the book of Paradise Lost, Milton, when he says, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. The gods need slaves. Now, originally, the Serpent Masters attempted normal sexual liaisons with the Earth women, but they proved unsuccessful. I know how they feel. That's hard for the gods. Think alone for men.
Goes both ways.
Yeah, probably. Genesis is saying, the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. So obvious that I don't know how anybody could try and uninterpret that. Obviously, the higher beings, whether they were gods or whether they're not, had sexual congress with the women. The Kebra Nagast from Ethiopia says, and the daughters of Cain, right? Here's the, no mystery now if you were here last night. Cain just means serpent. Remember Canaan? So the daughters of the serpent, with whom the angels had accompanied themselves, conceived, but they were unable to bring forth their children, and they died. And of the children who were in their wombs, some died, and some came forth. Having split open the bellies of their mothers, they came forth by their navels. So very unsuccessful, obviously. Didn't work, is basically what the ancient books are saying. Didn't work. So when normal congress was repeatedly unsuccessful, the visitors changed their strategy and began reproducing in a different and much more morally taboo manner. They knew that they were doing an unholy thing. Well, what could I possibly be talking about then? And what is this unholy thing? In the book of Enoch, you're not going to believe it, but they even have that statement from the man himself, from the leader himself. In the great book of Enoch, which the Medicis translated, then says Samyaza, who was their leader, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. What sin? The scholars are thinking the sin concerns the physical impregnation of the female. It does not. It refers to something so much more than that. It refers to this. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And the Corinthians backs this up, that there wasn't one Adam, there was two. And the first man, Adam, became a living being, and the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural came first, and after that the spiritual. The first man was made of dust of the earth, the second man from heaven. Sounds very holy until you replace the word spiritual with genetic. See, the word spiritual is a cover term, meaning that they're of the gods. What this really says is the first man, the earth man, became a living being. The last man, a life-giving spirit. The heavenly man, the spiritual man, did not come first, but the earth man did. And after that came the spiritual one from above, right? The first man was of the dust of the earth, meaning of the earth. It's not a derogatory term, it just means from the planet earth. And the second man we made from heaven. That's what happened. And our image literally means that the gods, as William Blake is showing here, interfered genetically with the human race. Or whoever they were. We don't even have a vision of who those people were. We don't know if they were like us. We don't know anything about them. We don't even know if they were the Neanderthals or the Cro-Magnon or the Angus or whoever they were. But on this planet was a very civilized race. Our original forefathers. The visitors came up from the bottom, from under the earth and from the seas, and they sent small detachments so as not to alarm, right, the indigenous people of the earth. They would send about 2 or 3 of their own folks to visit with the tribes. That's where you hear the tribes talking about, we met 3 visitors. 3 angels came, and they could knit bones, they could dig wells, they could, speak in strange tongues. And they said, we're from there. When they were asked, where do you come from? They would point to the skies. Now, when you see little contingents going around like that, doesn't that often tell you that those are contingents of a larger group centered somewhere else? That they're sending little ambassadors out to see what's going on? And then they started to corral, they started to bring the human race, however they would have done that, incentives. They brought them to the compound of Atlantis, just like the movie Planet of the Apes actually shows. And there they would have sequestered them and taken the diagnosis. They would have started reading them. They would have started taking analyses of their whole biology. Probably not even aware, the people who were going through this were not even aware of it originally. And the being that they created, when they spliced their DNA with this, our forefathers, is called the firstborn. Every time you read that book and that word in the Bible, start realizing what it really says. This is a reference to the sons of the serpent. If we talk about the serpent people being a name for the visitors, then clearly the sons of the serpent is a good euphemism for their first progeny, right? It's a hybrid race, also known as the Elohim. So when you hear about the Yahwistic concept and then you hear about the Elohim, this is what you're also hearing about. Not individuals, but races. Make a lot of sense in the Bible if you see that they're talking about races. I refer to it, just for artistic license, as Homo Atlantis. A remarkable being like nothing else in the universe. Part human DNA, what we could now call human, and part alien DNA, meaning scintillating intelligence like their masters. I mean, Mr. Spock and 10,000 years beyond, you're dealing with the real McCoy here from a point of view of intelligence. But these alien beings had no violet ray. They had no emotions like we know it. They had no spiritual awakening. Whereas the earth people did. They had that quality that is the spiritual connection to the matrix, to the mother. So Homo Atlantis had both of these capacities and was actually very peculiar even to their fathers. The alien warlocks of Atlantis who made Homo Atlantis were perplexed by this other capacity. They didn't even understand it. We would call it goodness, or we would call it connection to, nature. The aliens, well, first of all, they weren't even from here, so of course they wouldn't feel it. So they didn't quite understand that. But if you don't understand something, you don't bother with it, you don't see it. Because it's not in your nature. You just rack it up to being, what, a foible, an unnecessary emotional glitch.
So you would say that's love?
Right. You could say that it was love, yeah. A very specific kind of love, right? Then you're not going to believe what happened next. And I'm cutting a long story short because we're not sure of all of these dates. But after they had created this race of Homo Atlantis, and I think these were androgynous beings as well. I think that there may have been male and female versions, but I'm more inclined to think that Homo Atlantis was a totally androgynous entity. Well, Homo Atlantis, because these sons of the serpent had this spiritual capacity, had this other kind of connectivity to the universe other than their fathers, they actually turned around after maybe 1,000 years or a few hundred years and said, why would we even want to be servants for these masters of ours? We don't even like them. They're not very good people. And the sum result of it is that the sons of the serpent exodus. They leave Atlantis. They have a fight or they have a disagreement and they actually plan to leave. And what they do is they go to a continent of Oceania and set up a thriving civilization of their own. And Oceania we know better as Lemuria, which would be where the Pacific is now. Of course, remember, there was no water in those days. Remember that whole thing about how did they get elephants over in Mexico? How did they get tobacco over in Egypt? With all that water there, how did our ancient forefathers row over there? Well, look, for God's sake, it was walking distance, right? There was no water there. That's how you get all of these strange anomalies. It's very simple. So they go to Lemuria, which means what? Land ancestral, land of the ancestors, right? Etymology. From Mu, or Muhadevi, the Hindu mother goddess. So it's a Hindu word. The goddess was the personification of Lemuria itself, the motherland of humanity. Shiva, her counterpart, the great father of humanity. They set up their own thriving culture, a rival culture now, of course, on Lemuria. The Indian Tamil text, the Silappatikaran, describes a lost continent in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. It calls the Kamai Nadu, or Kamari Kandam, which means dragon land of the immortal serpents. The ancient books are talking all about it. The rebellion and exodus of the sons compelled the Atlanteans to return to their drawing boards. They began a second major hybridization program and created the Mark II being that we can now call Adamic. These beings were of both sexes and they made excellent servants in the garden. The whole idea was to have servants in the first place, right? To bring you your tea and coffee and the newspaper and the Reader's Digest or whatever you need to have happen. To clean up. Well, these guys didn't like the fact that these sons took off. These beautiful creations that they had made, just bugger off and set up their own thriving civilization, and really nothing can be done about it. But except they went back to the drawing board and they created a new entity. Well, if you can do it, you can do it. If you've got that kind of skill. And as the Popol Vuh, from reading this, you're now going to understand why so many books were burned. This one little few sentences will explain why. Let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. What shall we do to be invoked, to be remembered in the earth? We have tried with our first creatures, but we could not make them venerate us. So then let us try to make obedient, respectful beings who shall nourish and sustain us. Says it all, right? Now you know why the conquistadors went and burned these people's books by the thousand, because they're telling the whole story. But even from this one caption, we can put a lot together.
Where does that book come from, Mike?
Popol Vuh is the Mayan codex. So they do put before us, so Adamic man was made. And Adamics were in two kinds. There were the Eves and the Adams, meaning what we now know to be male and female. And we are being told, erroneously, that you see, our forefathers are the Neanderthals. However, that's not quite true because the latest science is proving otherwise. Neanderthals, say Stephen Knight and Robert Lomas, Neanderthals did not contribute mitochondrial DNA to modern humans. Neanderthals are simply not our ancestors. John A. Ball of Harvard, who should know, says most evolutionists believe that life was generated long ago, but perhaps it never was. Perhaps the earth was infected from elsewhere. See? Do some people know something we don't know? Here's a clincher. Max Flint and Otto Binder, who wrote the book Mankind, Child of the Stars. Molybdenum, they say, a very rare metal, plays an important role as a trace element in the physiology of all human creatures, of all earth creatures. It is surprising, therefore, that life so dependent on such a rare metal should arise on a molybdenum-poor world like ours. Yes, it is surprising, isn't it? Gunther Rosenberg, man is a unique animal, he says. He stands out like a sore thumb when comparisons are made with his cousins, the apes. The differences are more numerous than the similarities. The Darwin's theory of evolution is simply unproven. Lots of the scientists saying the same thing. In Mankind, Child of the Stars, the disappearance of Neanderthal man and the advent of Cro-Magnon man at approximately the same time is one of the truly big stumbling blocks of evolution to the evolution theory. Neanderthal most decidedly could not be the direct ancestor of Cro-Magnon, for they were two distinctly different types of human, physically and even skeletally. Cro-Magnon appeared with a mysteriously improved skeletal characteristics with a cranial capacity that is amazingly in excess by 100 cubic centimeters of us even. A similarly large degree of brain expansion occurred in absolutely no other species on Earth in all the ages of the past, nor has any genus shown evidence of brain mutation of a comparable magnitude since antiquity. These two writers are absolutely convinced, and they're from the California Institute of Technology and are some of the finest scientists you've got in this country, and they are convinced of the hybridization concept because they have extrapolated every other conceivable reason for this kind of thing to be happening between Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon, and they cannot decide. So they had to at least be open to the fact that hybridization was involved. And I come back with that and say that the alien geneticists did not desire a repeat of their first experiments. They realized that the error centered on the intellectual capacity of their progeny. As a result, for the Mark II experiments to succeed, Adamic man's intelligence would be artificially arrested. Because they thought, what have we done wrong the first time? Why did we have this exodus? Why did we have this falling out with our servants? And they realized it's because we deemed them to have the intelligence that we've got. That was a mistake. So in the next progeny, we'll not do that. My God, if a brain surgeon can sit you down in a chair to this day in a laboratory with a few probes in your head, he can do that. Right? You've seen that happen. The criminologists are doing it all the time in prisons. Well, imagine you have the power of DNA, that you're genetic scientists, many thousands of years advanced to where we are now. It can be done like switching on a light. So this is what they decided to do. And that's what the word Adam actually means. Adam comes from the word Adam, meaning cut off or divided. The divided man. Divided intellectually. The hemispheres of the brain, the DNA, whatever way you want to phrase it. Now the euphemism for that dumbing down process is used in the Bible is the word naked. It is a euphemism for being in a state of intellectual ignorance, ladies and gentlemen. So when you hear about Adam being put into the garden naked, it obviously doesn't mean that they were physically naked, but it does mean that they were intellectually naked. These are just words that were changed later on to make a big fable out of something that was quite straightforward. Man was put into the garden naked. Genesis tells you that God is saying to his creature, by the sweat of thy face will be thy bread, until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust thou art, and to dust thou wilt return. The condescension, you see. And the Lord said, look, the people are united, and they all have but one language. Come, let us go down, and therefore confound their language, so that they cannot understand one another's speech. That is simply yet more rhetoric for the DNA changes, the genetic alphabet soup, right? And the dumbing down process, so that they couldn't understand each other, meaning they wouldn't have access to the higher thought processes. The confusion. It's not over language, it's not over physical language. And the Lord said, behold, the man has become one as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever, we better do something. So here's the fear. You see how the fear, and by the way, here's this us word that has perplexed lots of people. And God said he has become one of us. That alone causes a lot of problems. But then it also says that how could man has known good and evil. He's already telling you that at some point man knew the secrets of good and evil, had complete knowledge, and that they had to do something. And then comes this most interesting way of explaining that in the Bible. They go, we will prevent him from taking of the tree of life. Now what is that? That is another euphemism. That is another euphemism for the knowledge of human genetics. Because for thousands upon thousands of years, that is exactly how the tree of the genetic, the DNA strands were shown. Anyone who's done a little bit of homework into the occult or into Kabbalah know that the tree of life was the way that the ancient people symbolized what they now show you as being those twin strands of DNA. Because the scientists don't show you it rightly. It's not a model like a Lego set floating in hyperspace, like they show you on TV, the DNA. The DNA is a form of energy. That's all it is. It's a form of harmonic energy. They want to physicalize it and make it look like this little Lego set that kids build in school, right? In fact, the ancients were one up on them. The ancients, even when they showed that it was a tree, right? Which already shows you that they had an organic understanding of it. That it was a tree that had its roots in the earth, and it had 22 branches. The 22 paths on the Kabbalistic tree of life, or the 22 branches, which is the 22 codons in the DNA. It was always shown as the tree of life. So when you say we are not allowing them to eat of the forbidden fruit, it simply meant we're not going to allow them to have the higher knowledge, the higher scientific knowledge. Expressly, we're not going to let them know about genetics. Either their genetics or how to do it. This would be the knowledge that would be denied. And this is a good place to jump in and then explain why so many people like David Icke and others are using the word serpent, sort of making them, like they may have looked like that. No, that's not true. The reason why the serpent came up, I've already explained partly, but it says here that the Semitic word for serpent is nahash. Right? They didn't use vowels in Hebrew, but this is pronounced nahash, meaning to discover or find out. Evidently, this refers to science. The Nephilim were simply scientists. And the symbol of the find out, you see, nahash, became the serpent. And we're still using it today. And do you know that in England, the British Medical Association is called the National Health Service? Look at the beginning letters, NHS, the nahash. Let's stop for a bathroom break. Time for lunch. Yeah, the DNA spiral was known in ancient times, pure and simple. It's not a recent invention. And these alien visitors, wherever they had been on their planet, they had this kind of knowledge. And because of the shape, when you observe the DNA spiral, you do see that it is a form of wave energy. It's a motion. It's not a Lego set floating in hyperspace, but it does appear to be serpentine. So the masters of the genetics would naturally wear that or use that as a motif or a symbol and become known on our planet as the serpent people. That's where the whole imagery part, you see, factors in. And again, the whole idea of the creation of man. Did you know that when they use the word creation in the Bible, it actually originally was translated as built? Originally, when it was first translated, it meant constructed or built, not created. In Genesis 2:7, they say, "And the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Here you see the Egyptian god Thoth with what? The twin wands. And then the Ankh at the facial area, see at the chakra here, animating the pharaoh, animating human. The gods, and then there's human. And then later on they're trying to tell us, no, the human is God. I mean, come on, which one is it then? Another fascinating part of this is that look what he's putting up to the dead pharaoh or the dead human's face to give him the spirit of life is what we now know to be called the Ankh. And everyone has had an interpretation of what the Ankh is. It's the symbol of life, it's a symbol of breath, it's a unification of the opposites. And that's all probably true. But in fact, again, go to the word. The word Ankh, because they did not use vowels in the ancient days, you have to sort of superimpose the vowels into this word, and then you'll discover what it means. It actually is the word Anunnaki. Ankh is the word actually that means the Anunnaki. So when you see any of the great gods holding it, they're holding it because they're literally telling you, here I am, that's who I am. We're from the stars. We're the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki, meaning the heavenly serpents. From Enki or Anki, meaning from heaven to earth. The Ankh only means those who have come from heaven to earth. So those gods that we're seen holding it are either those beings from another dimension or are the descendants, you see, those who have inherited the wisdom and the knowledge of the people from before. I'm not saying they're all evil. We'll come to that later on. And then when you hear euphemisms within the spiritual community of the tree of life and the tree of good and evil, and it all sounds very abstract and holy, actually all it means is that the term does not refer to anything esoteric. It simply refers to the two contingents or races in residence on this planet, both custodians and utilizers of the knowledge of genetics, the good and or the evil. So the dragon represents the two races of Atlantis, right, or Atlantis and Lemuria, who contended for hegemony everywhere. They are the twins of all mythologies, the two contending serpents of the Caduceus, right? You have two facing serpents on the Caduceus, which devour each other in endless wars from the primordial ages down to the present day.
Why were they at war? Why were they at war?
Because one was good and one was invasive, manipulative. One was bent on having servants who were dumbed down, and the other ones were about liberating us to be the gods that we should have been. And again, personified in the Pharaonic Egyptian paradigm and the Hebrew paradigm that came later. The Mosaic commandments, thou shalt not, and the Pharaoh idea that everyone is God. You see, in the idea of the Egyptian mythology, the Pharaoh, the God that you meet as the neophyte is brought into this, the chamber, right? You've seen the big symbol of the papyrus of Ani where there's the scales and the neophyte is being brought in to see, and then you see Osiris sitting with Nephthys and Isis in the enclosure. But the Egyptians were not saying that that's the God you're going to meet after you become all balanced and holy and, and enlightened. No, that's the God you become. That's why he's sectioned off. The God Osiris on the throne is the neophyte. In the Christian mythology, this went, no, you're the unholy sinner. Here's the God you're going to worship. It makes no sense if you actually think about that. So when you see in this modern world today, even right today, in the symbolism of the world, you'll find that there's this forbidden fruit motif turning up. Now, first of all, even just as a totally innocent, and I do this with the kids when we're looking at this kind of symbolism, what on earth has a symbol literally from the Bible, from a religious, theocratic, so-called religious, non-scientific book, doing as a corporate logo for one of the most powerful scientific communities in the world? Not only is it striated in the symbols of the chakras, which bothers me enough, but it's even an apple with a bite out of it, literally saying, we, the silicon guys, are providing you with the forbidden fruit. Why that tie-in? Why are they doing that? Why are they associating something of the spiritual and the theosophical with their scientific? There may be a reason. There may be a reason why they're using the serpent. There may be a reason why the word Pentium, if you put the S-E-R on the front of this word that doesn't mean anything in English, you'll soon see what it means. Because that word means nothing in English. And that's one thing we look out for when we're looking at the corporate logo thing. About the 70% of all the products we buy that are even in your refrigerator at home and certainly in the Safeways and everywhere else, they don't mean things in English. Is that just marketing jargon? Would you think not? You think that a merchant would want to sell his product as easily and as quickly as possible, yet 70% of the products do not mean anything in English, but they certainly do mean something in Latin, Greek, or Hebrew, or one of the old magical languages. Because that's the idea, is for them to communicate with something deep inside of you. The inner intelligence, the intelligence within. What are we talking about here? Francis Crick, the so-called discoverer of DNA, hardly, in his book, Life Itself, he too suggests an extraterrestrial origin for life. He just died last week. He suggests that life in microscopic form may have been sent to other planets by alien beings in suitable protective vessels, etc., etc., etc. He's basically telling you that. One thing I really wanted to draw your attention to is this corporate logo bit. Look how here they've got the future of medicine, right? So in other words, it's an article in Time magazine that they're trying to talk about the future of medicine. But are they saying something else with the symbolism? You have the DNA spiral, do you not? And you have what else? Right. So the left brain, they're telling you one thing, but with the right brain, they're telling you infinitely more. But because we're brought up in a society that is symbol illiterate, hey, it's a cute picture. Let's read the article. Is there evidence of cloning? Read this with me now, together, after what we've been talking about. First of all, no. Let's look at the right brain message. Look what we've got. Cloning humans, right, is the title, but the imagery is from where? Again, from Genesis, from Michelangelo and his depiction on the Sistine Chapel of God making man. You see, so what they're doing, they're completely without legal precedence, without any moral precedence, linking artistically something from the world I'm talking about and putting it in with their own. But if you as a spiritualist try to use some scientific evidence, go, oh, no, that's all taboo. You can't do that. You can't, go over here into the science world and start proving your theories, but yet they do it all the time in reverse. But let's just read this about the thing about cloning. Read this chapter from Genesis. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, right? And brought her unto man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Remember I was saying yesterday that when you look into these old antique folk stories and magical tradition, we can now update them because we know a lot now, even in the last 20 years, about new science. Well, look what you can read into that when we know about cloning. I love this bit where it goes, and she shall be called woman. It's like one of these Kirk Douglas, Cecil B. DeMille movies. And she shall be called woman. Okay. Now comes something so interesting, it's just... We talked about that we would try to, at least approach a solution to this whole Garden of Eden, Genesis conundrum. Because we've been sitting around waiting for 2,000 years for the priests to do it, right? Anyway, Adam is happy in the garden, digging, bringing them tea and coffee and changing the channels for the masters, and all whatever else they're doing. And totally, dumbed down, having the faintest idea what in the world is going on. But you see, what was happening over in Lemuria is Mark 1 man, right? That's the Lemurian sons of the serpent entities, Homo Atlantis, is left. They're free. But they know that as soon as they're gone, their Atlantean master is going to be up to something. So they've been watching them. They've been keeping tabs on each other. And lo and behold, the Lemurians do find out, in fact, that the Atlantean warlocks have gone back to the drawing board and now have a new, servant serving them. But you see, as the fact that they have the conscious, what we would now call the conscience, and because they are spiritually endowed, they have a quandary, don't they? Because it's like, hold on a minute, we've got free, but now these guys have spliced their DNA again, and they've created Adamic man, but isn't Adamic man and Eve sort of cousins to us? Because what do they have in common? The human element. So now they got this quandary. Do we get free and just let them suffer in the garden, or what do we do? So the Lemurians decided, the sons of the serpent became aware of their creator's second experiments. They had a dilemma. realizing that the race of Adam was in fact kindred to themselves because they both possessed what might be called the human DNA. It was therefore decided that representatives would be sent to Atlantis to dialogue with the enslaved and dumb down Adams and Eves. Thus we have the story, corrupted later, of the serpent entering the garden. Not as a deceiver, but as a revealer. Right? As Michelangelo is trying to show you here, if you study the imagery carefully. Is this the symbol of the evil serpent that is waylaying people? Or is it that he's rising them up from their supine and submissive position? Okay? Leonardo is telling us something. And do you notice how the serpent is around the tree of life? Look at the beauty of this man's work. That he's literally is showing you that the serpent is around the tree of life and is awakening or reaching out to Adam and Eve. Adam is somewhat in a resistance, but Eve is not. There's a certain turning. There's a certain recognition here. The sons entered the garden and spoke with their genetic cousins. They counseled them to throw off their chains of servitude and accompany them back to Lemuria, where they would be initiated into all that had been hidden from them. It is written that the Adams were resistant to the invitation, but fortunately the responses of the Eves was different. And this brings us to the point that I was trying to make yesterday. So would you be. So would you be if you met these individuals. And they say that the Eves were extremely attracted by the magnetism and the power and something about these beings. They had somewhat of the recognition. It's possible that the Earth strain of DNA was a little bit stronger in the women than it was in the Adams. So they had for a more of a mysterious attraction to the Lemurians because of the fact that they were highly awakened beings. So they couldn't get through to the dumbass Adams at all. Right? But the Eves were willing to give it a listen, you know. Let's hang on to this. Well, see, this is what happens, and no matter how many talks I give on this subject, invariably women come up to me at the end and go, why did we have to take the Adams with us? Why couldn't we just buggered off with the Lemurians and left them to rot? I go, yeah, the answer to that we'll never know. Could have really suffered from that one. One of the finest scholars that have ever lived. And we have a feminist movement in the West, and a feminist movement that could do well to know about its models, which it doesn't. Ayn Rand, and this woman particularly. Madame Blavatsky is one of the finest scholars that have ever lived. And she had the number on this. And in one of her quotes in one of her books, she says, the appellation Satan in Hebrew belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. Wow, is that a heavy statement? And that is exactly what happened. The Adams are sitting scratching their head going, what's this all about? And the Eves are packing their bags and they're ready to go. And they went to Lemuria, and that's exactly what happened. The Lemurians did say, know ye not your gods, what we can do also, you can do and more. And when they arrived on Lemuria, they were instructed by the Lemurians into the higher mysteries. Their DNA was probably even physically changed. And they were initiated and awakened into the secret of the genetics and lots of other things while they were on Lemuria. And this whole bit about the instruction under the tree, of the seer, of the shaman, instructing the neophyte under the tree of life into the hidden mysteries, is a very old motif. Here the Mayans are using the serpent very clearly, that the priest, the tree of life, and the people coming around for tuition to take off the tree of life. And very interesting to the Celtic tradition is that it is from this period of time, probably somewhere in the region of 15,000 years ago, maybe more, maybe less, is when we have the rise of the cult of the priestess. That's where it comes from. It is not based on the Atlantean paradigm. It was based on the Lemurian paradigm. And that is why we all have in our minds this idea that once upon a time on this planet there was a harmonious, beautiful time when we lived in a paradisical place. That has been displaced to Atlantis. Okay, so everyone goes, Atlantis, I lived on Atlantis. Beware, beware, beware this generic cliched stuff. No, it's not. Atlantis was the place in which we were actually in servitude. It was on the continent of Lemuria, and this thriving culture that was based on more egalitarian principles. And specifically, the sons of the serpent believed that because the Eves were the ones that were a little bit more open to them, they never forgot that. So they always had a deeper connection with the Eves than they maybe did with the Adams, all right? So when they got to Lemuria, they were favored. Among the women, they were much more favored, and they were the first then to be initiated in the process of initiation. And they were given special status. because it was never forgotten that something within them was first, you see, hearkening to what was being said. And it's from this time that you have the rise of the lunar cult and the priestesses. It is the knight on armor who's down on his knees, not the other way around, as the Christians would like to have it later on.
Michael, just a question about timelines.
Yeah.
So if Atlantis is happening, the whole Egyptian pyramids, is that not happened yet, or
Oh no, this is way later.
that's way later?
Egyptians, there's hundreds, I mean, not hundreds of thousands, but many, many thousands of years later. So they were the ones listening to the Lemurian wizards. The Eves were given special powers. That is why the Christian church, the Dominican people, these had to rise up against the women specifically, because they knew whose DNA they carry, and they knew what wisdom was in their heads. All that knowledge about the flora and the fauna, all that herbalism, all of that wisdom, right? The initiation powers, the oracles that later we know in Greece, which always attend a serpent, do they not? Where does that all come from? In fact, the Egyptian, you were just asking about the Egyptian. Well, in fact, the Egyptian hieroglyphic for a woman is what? Is a snake, a serpent. In Egyptian, when you want to write the word woman, you write a serpent. That's how clearly there was no differentiation at all. Why do you think the serpent later became evil? Yeah? Get it? Because the female symbol and the serpent were the one and the same. The etymology proves it, the symbolism, all of it goes together when you really understand what was going on. And the females were then the keepers of the gnosis, the keepers of the grail. You always see that in the Arthurian tradition, and in the Celtic tradition it's an absolute staple, that the female is the keeper of the grail. And the Christians couldn't erase it, so they brought in Mother Mary. But the knights always take initiation from the feminine, who is the representation of something else. In fact, the word secret, hey, I got a secret. We're going to initiate you into a secret. Where does the word secret even come from? From the word secretion, indicating the priestess cults, right? The biology of the female. Did you know that? The word harlot in the Bible was mistranslated from the Greek, I believe, herodulai. And the word herodulai actually means sacred or beloved woman. But they translated it into harlot. You can see then, if you can do that, my God, there's no end to it. The corruption. The word mystery comes from the Egyptian word mesta, which meant woman. Oh, there's a big mystery, say the Christians. A great mystery. Yeah, there's a mystery. Tell us what the word mystery means. Then maybe we'll solve the mystery. The word mystery meant the mesta. Women in Egypt were called mesta. M-Y-S-T-A. Or mesta. The mesta. Well, the mystery has something endemically to do with the female. The Christians, they got a different idea. In Genesis, Jehovah is saying, because thou hast done this, of course, no footnote to tell you what exactly, thou art cursed above all cattle, above every beast of the field, upon thy belly thou wilt go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of their life, and they have held to that. The people that they have slaughtered, they have held to that, because they don't forget. These Atlanteans have long memories. Leonard Schlein, in a classic book, The Alphabet and the Goddess, he says, when we look back across the historical time of patriarchy, there seems to be some terrible inevitability, a relentless desire to crush the female essence. But he goes on, like so many, to say, the question of why is one of the most puzzling of our time. I hope from now on it is never not going to be puzzling, because remember I was telling you yesterday about the full circle of the cards, 21, and we're in the 21st century and we're going back to the stellar cult paradigm, and that women are going to have a very major role in this because they give birth to things, don't they? Well, they're going to give birth to whatever age is coming next, but they're not going to be able to do it until they connect with what got wrong in the first place. You can't fix something unless you know where it went wrong. So it's very important that women understand this, because they're going to pick up from this. They're going to understand about Lemuria as opposed to Atlantis. They're going to understand about the genetic manipulation of man and how, oh, science is not for women, they've been told. You know, you stay at home and cook food. You're not meant to be in science. Hang on a minute. The women, as you can see, were the keepers of the high arts of science. The very symbolisms of science were originally invested in the female understanding. Look at how much has been debauched. That's why the Christians did not want women to hold any major office within the theology. Well, of course not. You think they want you going to the seminaries and reading those volumes to find out what we're finding out here now? The very word seminary comes from the word semen, meaning the male. Seminaries. The way they dress, the whole thing is to appropriate the power of the female. Yet they refer to their churches as Holy Mother Church. I mean, do me a favor, right? Now, it so happened, as I told you, the females were given favoritism. But there was, on a few occasions, not many, but a few occasions, what would actually happen. And remember, when they were brought to Lemuria, the Eves were allowed to commingle with the Adams. That was kept cool because they were of the same kind and they were told to live together and be amongst themselves. But in certain instances, there was times in which one of the sons of the serpent, that's a full Lemurian, would actually have congress with one of the Eves, right? They would marry together. A rare incident. And I'm not really sure whether that involves sexuality or involves some sort of hybridization, DNA stuff. Who knows, right? But at some point, it did involve sexual mating as we know it. And whenever that unique experience would happen, the offspring of that congress was referred to as the son of a virgin. That is where the original meaning of it came from, if you go back. It is a euphemism for conception between a woman, an Eve, and a member of the serpent race. Not an Adam, but a serpent race. That exceptional child who was now going to be born, who would definitely have a major destiny, was always known as the son of a virgin because the woman had not been touched by whom? An Adam. That's all it meant. He had been touched by a god. There was the god idea, not a god, of course, but a Lemurian. And to pick up on that also, whenever you hear the term immaculate conception, just in your mind, think it really means genetic conception. That's all it means. And everybody in the ancient world going, hey, I'm it. Alexander the Great, hey, I'm immaculately conceived. Samson was immaculately conceived. David, Solomon, it's not just Jesus. Everybody who's a hero in the ancient world were telling you that they were sons of the gods. And according to Jordan Maxwell, they may actually have been. If you actually read between the lines of the life of Alexander the Great, there's some very interesting information there. But many of the kings of the ancient world said that had happened to them. Here in the Greek, you've got the tree of life, the palm. I don't know if you know this, but the mystery schools in Egypt were called palmyriums. Right? In Ireland, they were called the Grove schools, But in Egypt, the mystery school was called palmyrium, and the symbol was a palm tree. So just for anybody who's into art theory, if you ever see the palm tree in a sacred painting, it's telling you something. Here you have the serpent, but the serpent is made to look very phallic. And here you have the pregnant female. So they're telling you all about it. And here's the eros with the arrow and the bow, which is the sexual symbolism. The congress with the serpent. Not a physical serpent, but the serpent was used as a symbol for a being, an entity, that later in history they didn't want to draw attention to, so they used a physical serpent. The eagle, coming out of the Roman and the Babylonian. Who are the eagles? Right? The ancient totems, right? Not only from Hitler, not only from the Romans, but from the Babylonians, the giant eagles, then the Egyptians, as we saw yesterday. And then we have, when they landed, so-called landed on the moon, they said the eagle has landed. Everybody should have turned around and go, what eagle? What is the phraseology all about? What eagle has landed? In corporate logos, which by now you know fascinates me, and here's a good reason why. Is somebody telling us something here? You've got the name of the company is Virgin Atlantic, right? Atlantis and Virgin. You've got a black heart. That worries me. You've got the symbol of the Virgin. You've got the big red dragon. You've got the tree of life, and you've got the syzygy, or the cloned entity. Of all the logos in the world you could think of, they come up with this. Well, I've looked into the life of Roger Dean, the artist who did this, and I've looked into the lives of Richard Branson. And I found out who's paying their checks. If you needed any more evidence, just look at it. Interesting thing about Jesus of Nazareth. Where does the word Nazareth come from? Because there was never a place at any time called Nazareth. On no map, in no stretch of the imagination, can they ever find a place called Nazareth in the Holy Land. That's because there wasn't one. It was no locale. The word derives from the Egyptian Nazir, which meant prince who is sent. And also comes from Nasir, meaning Sirius. It is Jesus of Nasirius. Furthermore, the word carpenter, right, Jesus the carpenter, comes from Nagar, meaning the serpent priests. And Christ is meant to say himself in Revelation, I am the root and offspring of David, the bright and morning star. Look at all this identification with the cosmos. Whether it's actually Sirius or not, we don't know, because you can use words interchangeably. But certainly it's from outside. And even in the Bible, when you hear the word genes and seed, the seed of David, the blood of the lamb, again, think genes. That's what they're talking. These are just euphemisms. Convert it in your mind to genetic science and you'll get the point. All right. The Atlanteans wake up and there's no coffee, and there's no tea. And what the hell what's happening here? And they go out, and there's no breakfast, and the place is deserted, and they suddenly find out that they've been stumped for a third time. First time, they're booted out of their own, planet, which mustn't have been very much fun. They come to a planet in which they create the perfect servant, and that servant takes off on them. Then they make a third servant, the perfect servant, and they're seduced away. So they were angry, very angry, and I really mean angry, like really miffed. So much so that they actually unleashed on Lemuria what we would describe as a global thermonuclear war. That's how they responded. But the Lemurians are not stupid, nor were they asleep, and they retaliated in kind. And there was on this planet about 13,500 years ago, and there's more geological evidence to prove that this is in fact the case now. There was a war on this planet, the likes of which we have never seen. That was truly the First World War. And it's called the War of the Gods, and all the ancient legends talk about it. The Bible talks about it. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. In Samuel, woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the land of these almighty gods? Oh, wait a minute. More gods? I thought the Bible said there's only one God. These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all manner of plagues in the wilderness. Book of Baruch, another old, Gnostic gospel that's been discovered. There were the giants, famous from the beginning, that were so great in stature and so expert in war. Jeremiah, all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger. Job, he shall flee from the iron weapon. Look at the terminology, the iron weapon, and the bow shall strike him through. In the Indian Srimad Bhagavatam, it tells of a demon race which invaded the three planetary systems. Opposing the demons was the Hindu god Shiva, who possessed a powerful weapon that he fired at the enemy airships from his own. From Ovid, the Greek, giants attacked the very throne of heaven, he says. Jove struck them down. Look at this. 3 times had Poseidon, right, ventured with stern countenance to thrust his arms out of the water. 3 times he was unable to endure the scorching heat of the air. In the Mahabharata, which is incredible when you get into this, the Subha clung to the sky at a league's length. He threw at me rockets, missiles, spears, spikes, battle axes, 3-bladed javelins, flamethrowers without pausing. This is direct translation, by the way. The sky seemed to hold 100 suns, 100 moons, and 100 myriad stars. Neither day nor night could be made out, or the points of the compass. You don't need to write these down. They're all in the book. And the Ramayana mentions an iron thunderbolt capable of killing hundreds of thousands of humans. It was also said to be so powerful that it could have destroyed the earth. These weapons could only be used by royal decree. There's even passages where it mentions the fact that the weapon was used as retaliation for the other side using it first. Does that sound familiar or what, right? In the Samagardhana Sudrahara, there is a mention of manned space rockets as well as the means of propulsion. In the Samara Sudrahara, it says, we find mention of the use of biological weapons, each of which produced its own results. The Samhara debilitated its victims by attacking the motor centers of the brain, and the Moha caused blockage of nerve impulses, resulting in complete paralysis. How come we haven't heard about all this? Right? In this document from China, we find similar descriptions of germ warfare, and again references made to specific weapons causing specific results. Here's a direct passage from the Mahabharata. It's worth reading this. It was as if the elements had been unleashed. The sun spun round, scorched by the incandescent heat of the weapon. The world reeled in fever. Elephants were set on fire by the heat and ran to and fro in a frenzy. Water boiled, animals died, and the enemy was mown down, and the raging of the blaze made the trees collapse. Horses and war chariots were burned up. Thousands of chariots were destroyed. And then deep silence descended on the sea. The corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings. Never before have we seen such a ghastly weapon, and never before have we heard of such a weapon. A single projectile, right, charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and fire as bright as 10,000 suns, from a shaft fatal as the rod of death, endowed with the force of 1,000-eyed Indra's thunder. It was as destructive to all living creatures. Hostile warriors, see, implying a war, fell to earth like trees burned down in a raging fire. A substance like fire has sprung into existence. Blistering hills, rivers, and trees. All are being reduced to ashes. You, cruel and evil ones, drunk with pride, through that iron bolt, you have become exterminators of your race.
Is this coming up or is this from before?
Before. It's all from before. And they've been hiding it. If it was nothing taboo, then we'd read it. Just like you'd read, they put thousands of things in front of you. How come this has been suppressed? In every single translation of the Mahabharata before the 20th century, these passages were expunged. When the first English translators translated it, they just deleted any reference to any of this stuff. It came later. When the Hare Krishna types, were all coming over here, then they thought, we better do it right because they're going to do it. So these retranslations of the Mahabharata included this. This weapon was so fearful, and in great distress of mind, the king had the bolt reduced to fine powder and thrown into the sea. Even with these precautions, people's hair and fingernails fell out overnight. Birds turned white and their legs became scarlet and blistered, and food went bad. See? Now we can revisit this and make sense of it. In Celtic myth and legend, when I was young, I must have been no more than 13 when I started studying this. These are the kinds of things that I read then. From Charles Squire's Celtic myth and legend, where he's talking about the sun god of the Tuatha Dé Danann. They had a king, right? In Celtic legend, you always have 3 kings that rule, not one. The 3 spirals. They did everything with triples. And the 3 kings would have 3 consorts, 3 wives. And the wives of the 3 kings of Ireland are the women who gave their names to Ireland. When we say Erin in Ireland, Eriu, Fodla, and Banva, those are the names of goddesses. And they were the 3 queens of the kings of Ireland. Now the king would sit in his chair, but to his right he would have the sun king, the sun god, who's actually physically more powerful than him, an enlightened being. And his name is Lu Ildanach, Lu, the master of all the arts. But he had a weapon just like Nada had a weapon, the king. And the weapon of Lu, they say here that he also had a magic spear, which he had no need to wield himself, for it was alive and thirsted for blood. When battle was near, it was drawn out, then it roared and struggled against its thongs. Fire flashed from it, it tore through and through the ranks of the enemy, never tired of slaying. What does that sound like? Those laser, or the heat-seeking, missiles. You can understand now why before we had all of this military stuff of the 20th century, if you did read that, it sounded like nonsense. But we are now in the 21st century where we have modern technologies in this world that we can look back and go, my God, you cannot mistranslate that. Obviously, they had these weaponry. And I'm just giving you tiny little edits from these stories. And if it's good enough for Frederick Soddy, who literally discovered radium, right, one of the supreme scientists in this field, it should be good enough for us. He says, can we not read, and he's talking about the Mahabharata, can we not read in them some justification for the belief that some forgotten race of men attained not only the knowledge that we have so recently won, but also that power that is not yet ours? I like that. I believe that there have been civilizations in the past that were familiar with atomic energy and that by misusing it, they were totally destroyed. He hasn't got a point wrong. And coincidence of coincidences, look, check this out. Oppenheimer was the theoretical physicist and supervising scientist of the Manhattan Project. He was familiar with ancient Sanskrit literature. He never stopped quoting it. But here's the thing. Giving a lecture in Rochester University, a student stood up and asked him a question. He said, sir, was the bomb exploded at Alamogordo during the Manhattan Project the first one to be detonated? I think that's a strange question in the first place. And you know what the answer is? Even more strange. Dr. Oppenheimer, well, yes. In modern times, of course. From the horse's mouth. So, we have the flood, and we have the war. Then what? Well, then I want to address something that nobody in the UFO field, or anyone who's into paranormal subjects, or anyone who's into, tracking these legends and things like that, from Zachariah Sitchin onwards, and everybody else in between, have never bothered to ask something very, very, very important. And like you, I used to go and look at these lectures. I've read all these people's books. I was a great fan of it all. But it kept on nagging at me. It's going, hold on a minute. Even if these people say it was 400,000 years ago or it was 50,000 years ago, well, wait a minute. We're in the 21st century. How come we're still fighting this now? If you're talking about something that happened so far back, shouldn't it have been all over and done with and resolved one way or the other? Meaning that if there was indeed a war of the gods, and if evil came into being due to the repeated biomanipulation of Homo sapien, why is it that neither side seems to have triumphed? Well, it's a very simple question. Because if one or these other of these two contingents had survived, then if the Atlanteans had won, we'd all be living in servitude, right? Probably digging mines and whatever else. And we'd be completely dumbed down as well. We wouldn't even be able to think in these ways. And that would be the end of it. We would not even be, worried about it. And if the Lemurians had won, then we'd all be living in lives of, happiness and paradise and goodness and love and friendship, which is also not the case. So why is there's this delay factor? Just the simple fact of the fact that thousands of years have gone by and we're still dealing with the quandary has always puzzled me, and I've never found an explanation until I found out what the reason was. There was a variable. The answer to it means that something else must have come in that prevented the conclusion. And that thing, by the way, was this. The pole shift. Alan and Delaire say that studies have shown that 10,000 years BC, or over 12,000 years from now, the celestial pole was inclined at an angle of 30 degrees from its present position. This in turn strongly suggests that the terrestrial axis then orientated differently from today. The gigantic worldwide tectonic disturbances of the late Pleistocene times occurred almost simultaneously and on a near unimaginable scale, precisely what could be expected from a powerful external influence. Look at that. But not from the Ice Age conditions conventionally believed to have existed then. Significantly, a drop in the strength of the Earth's magnetic field appears to have occurred sometime between 13,750 and 12,350 years ago, attended by various other important changes, including earthquakes, volcanism, water table fluctuations, and large-scale climatic variations. Of these, severe earthquakes in particular may even have induced the axial wobble and polarity reversals. Actually, it's not a polarity reversal. They're wrong. Pole shift does not necessarily mean reversal. It just means a sort of tipping like that. That's all it would take. Paul Dunbavin in Atlantis of the West, he says something interesting. If the impact occurred at a steep angle, then most of the energy would ultimately go into modifying the Earth's orbital motion. Now, deluge is one thing, right? Rocks and debris and water, even falling down from another planet into our Earth, yeah, that's cataclysmic. But the worst effects of that can be cleared up in a few hundred years. Pole shift, that's totally different. I mean, that is like the Eiffel Tower sticking head first in Hawaii. Right? That's boulders the size of mountains flying through the air. That's, extinctions on a vast level. That's the emptying out of the waters that were here and flowing back and forth and everywhere. All this chaos, unimaginable chaos. It's not just something that's going to clear itself away in a few hundred years. It's absolute, unbelievable, total destruction. The book of Enoch is telling us all about it. I saw in a vision how the heavens collapsed. And when it fell to earth, I saw how the earth was swallowed up in a great abyss. I also lifted up my voice to cry aloud and said, the earth is destroyed. In fact, as Mauricio Nunes de Santos, who's one of the Latin American experts on Atlantis, he says that the word Atlas or Atlantis in Greek means the one who could not withstand the skies. That's what the word actually means. Yeah. In Sanskrit, Atlantis or Atlas also means that which is deprived of its pillar, that which is bottomless, or that which is sunk to the bottom. That's where the word Atlantis actually comes from. But as I told you, the Celts were very specific. Yesterday we looked at the 4 continents that they came from, not one. They say that their world, Atlantis, was many. And that's been proven now. Just for clarity's sake, the continents that were lost forever was Appalachia, Tyrrhenia, whereas the Mediterranean is now, Oceania, Lemuria was gone, Beringia, which was in the extreme north, Fennoscandia, and the Miocene Ocean. That was the world that we knew it 13,000 years ago, and there isn't a trace of it left. Perhaps England, Ireland, yep, okay, whatever. Maybe Egypt, who knows? But it doesn't look too much like that anymore. We're talking about 5 continents just gone forever. And the Celts even speak about Avalon, and Lyonesse, these other little smaller ones that are still mentioned in the history books. Well, they're not around now, are they? We can't even imagine the devastation. Madame Blavatsky again says, under the evil insinuations of their demon Theftat, the Atlantis race became a nation of evil magicians. The giants and the magicians and all flesh died, and every man. In the Bible, the earth is utterly broken down, moved exceedingly. Moved exceedingly? Isaiah, behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. Like I'm telling you, even a little bit of a movement of the earth to us would feel like the earth was completely turned over, right? In fact, I don't think it was a total reversal or anything like that. It could have been, I don't know. I think it's more like it went like that, and then like that, and then like that, to where it is now. Like a normal top does. I don't think it just went like, but who knows?
So why does he say the Lord did that?
Because the Lord to the people who have now created the religions was who? The Atlantean overlords that came here. That's the Lord, Adonai, Jehovah.
And why would they do that?
They had this war. And the war, they didn't do it. The variable was, remember, that in the global nuclear war that they had together, that ferocity that took place incinerated the atmosphere of the earth. They had not been too long on this earth, so they probably didn't know how it was going to react. In the fury of the war that they had unleashed themselves, the earth itself responded this way. And they even document the fact that the moisture in the air was completely incinerated, which in itself would affect the magnetic, vibration of the earth. It would affect the Roche limit. And they say that the earth was sending out bolts and grabbing other planets and grabbing the moon and just reeling off of its axis. From internal effects, not some bloody comet or planet X hitting us or whatever the rest, these liars and disinformationists are trying to tell you. So they cover up this stuff. That's why they invented the Ice Age, because they'll do anything but have you look back to the times when this stuff was going on in our life. So even though they knew it's unsustainable and probably would be proven wrong by even some of their own geniuses, it doesn't matter. Anything will do for the time. And they created the Darwinian, Agassiz, Lyell, Wallace lie about the uniformitarianism and the Ice Age and the Pleistocene epoch lasting 2 million years. Yeah.
Do you think it could have happened because there was ice on the caps?
No.
Like there's now?
Ice action did happen, but there was no Ice Age. If you get Allen and Delaire's book, and you don't have to because I've abstracted all those relevant parts in my book, Allen and Delaire talk clearly about how the ice action took place. There was ice drift action, but it was instantaneous. It didn't come from ice ages and the freezing of the earth. It came from superheating the earth. Volcanism from the fury of the earth, when you superheat the atmosphere, when it then cools down, what happens is you get ice. And that's where the ice came from. It's all been, the science is in since 1995. Allen and Delaire's book, When the Earth Nearly Died, their second book, Cataclysm, and a few other books have come out with the proof about Appalachia sinking to the earth. They're not Atlantean scholars, but any idiot can connect the dots after reading that book. It's totally clear what happened. And they talk about the earth action. And the fury of this war is what turned the axis, because the earth responded that way. And they were surprised as anybody. They didn't plan on that happening. They didn't want that to happen. But that is the variable that suspended the denouement, the conclusion. In Peter, for this they are willingly ignorant. I love that. Willingly ignorant of the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. I thought this was a book on religion. What's all this then? Why are they telling us all this? I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. Yeah, no more sea where there should have been sea. Right? That could be a reference to Tiamat, where there's no more planet of sea, the ocean. Or more likely it's that the oceans that were here were tipping out and tipping back from where it normally was. Well, think about it. You just had a war, and the earth has responded, so nobody has won. In fact, you've lost, and big time lost. Because when you have 5 continents that you've created, Atlantis may even by that time have been quite an empire, actually. I tend to think it was. That when they talk about the garden, it was the whole of the earth that was being dominated by the Atlanteans in the same way that, say, the British Empire was dominated by little London. You can do that. That's called an empire. That also accounts for the reason why every person who goes out and turns over a stone and they think they found Atlantis, again, I would doubt that, because Atlantis it had bastions, right? So just like the King of England, when they had their trade routes, they could have a beautiful mansion, in India, right, which they have. Doesn't mean that's London. Yes, it's ruled by the British, but it doesn't mean it is Atlantis. Just because you pick up one of their tentacles elsewhere, one of their bastions elsewhere. But these characters, all of the land is gone. So what goes with it? All your computers, all your technology, all your spacecrafts that you've been using, right? It's all gone. And whatever would have been left would have been next to useless to you. We're talking about tremendous catastrophe, and it is that variable that has prevented this thing from being over and done with 13,000 years ago. Because most of the hardware and technology was also destroyed in the loss of these continents, and there was nothing anybody could do with it. It's an analogous system. It's an analogous to a gunfighter in your country here in the frontier days. The gunman who's got everything with his gun. If his gun is taken from him, he'll tell you he feels naked, right? Totally impotent. It's a samurai without his sword. You can have it all in here, but you have to have the weapon, don't you, in order to get what you want. Well, imagine the weaponry these people are talking about and the whole of their technological hardware. All gone. So what do? The loss of the technical hardware was a major setback and predicament from the Atlantean serpents. And the Lemurians too, no doubt. Not only the casualty statistics, but you've lost your hardware. Consequently, after contemplating their predicament, they resolved to manipulate the flow of history and the destiny of their Adamic progeny, pushing us ever forward to the point where the super technological hardware that was destroyed in the War of the Gods could be reproduced. Some instruments and weapons that survived, and these were sequestered in underground chambers or in temple precincts and referred to as the Holy of the Holies. Not because it was holy, they just didn't want you to go near it. And if you read in the Bible, where the Ark of the Covenant, they say, oh, don't go near it, your fingernails and your hair will fall out. It actually says that. And Moses is on the mountain. He's meant to be talking to God at the burning bush, and he comes back and he's all bleached white. Well, hell, you'd be bleached white if you go near anything radioactive. Right? His face is glowing. Hell yeah. This is to keep you away. So they bury it underground. There's a whole cult of this.